Good day, everyone. This is Richard Lowe with Author Talks. I have here Kim, who helps high stress professionals and busy families to keep the pause in their life to get courage to try new things and get to know themselves again. I'm sure Kim will explain that during the interview. I'm Richard Lowe, like I said, and I'm the owner of The Writing King and a ghostwriter. And I also do book coaching and LinkedIn branding. So let's get started on that interview. Kim, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. My pleasure. This is loads of fun. I'm doing 3 of these a week now, and
Phew.
just having a great time doing interviews and meeting new people. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your business?
Yeah, so I've been in the industry for over 35 years. I've worked in Fortune 100 companies with kind of revamping companies. And I've made a major pivot in my career in the last year where I'm creating a movement. It's called the Pause Power Movement. And basically it's encouraging everyone to take 15 minutes a day and to pause, unplug, and breathe. And just kind of be in the space and kind of uncover whatever you uncover. So that's really what I'm doing. Why I'm doing it. I'm a computer scientist by trade. I've been doing this since 1980. And I've been riding the wave, right? Anytime something new came up, I was on it. I was always on the top of the wave, right? And I was the first one to adopt, going on Facebook in 2005. Anything, right? I created, do you ever hear of realtor.com?
Hmm.
I
Yes, I
was
did.
the person that created that whole infrastructure. So that's kind of what I did. I do a lot of people transformation as well. And so in 2000, I'd say 15-ish, so about 10 years later, I kind of realized that I was in social media way too much. I'd get up in the morning, and the first thing I did was kind of just dive right into that social media.
Hmm.
And I found that all of a sudden, whoa, 3 hours later, I didn't have anything done, and I was still in social media. So I decided to deactivate my social media for 6 months. And I actually deactivated my phone for a year during that time to
Wow.
test out because, the whole infrastructure is made up of this now, right? And it's the driving force. It's really the thing in the driver's seat, right? So I wanted to see if I test the theory, if I could do this, right, without it. And I did. And I actually journaled about it every day. I actually found that I had a lot more time. I found that stresses in my neck, I had a lot of stresses, which I didn't realize, right? Kind of just lifted. And then I realized that I had so much time on my hands to do the things that I really wanted to do. And so I just kind of, I went on my merry way. I had this all journaled. And in the last year is when I started to kind of pull everything together. I actually wrote a book. I just pulled all my stories in the books and all the lessons that I learned. But really, what I'm seeing is, anytime I go out into public right now, I see people, sitting around the dining room table, for instance, and everyone is like this. And many times there's, mom sitting next to maybe the child, and the child's looking in the note in the phone, and the child might be dealing with, some anxiety or bullying or whatever, right within that, and mom doesn't even know what's happening. And there is this disconnect in communication. So what in my experience with the pause, right? I just kind of, it's really just a word to help remind us to pause. That's all, the only reason why I brought that into the picture. So then, when we say it, we pause and we actually agree to take that 15 minutes or even more, right? Then we can really just get back into our body and our mind, and maybe even spend time with people or just ourselves. Sometimes it's even uncomfortable to just to be with ourselves, right? Sometimes it's going to be uncomfortable just to be disconnected because we're so used to holding on to that smartphone or whatever gadget that may be, being in the app or whatever. So that's what I'm up to. That's what that is. Do you have any questions about it?
Well, it's very interesting. I've done a similar thing in that I jumped on social media. Well, I started roughly the same time you did. I started in 1980 on the PDP-11 and the VAX
Mhm.
PMS. and kind of rode the wave. I was a VP a couple times. Trader Joe's, I was a director of tech services, and super stressed. So I left that to become a ghostwriter, and that was a very good decision. But of course, I jumped straight into social media because it's a good way to advertise. At least it appears that way on the surface. Wasted a lot of money and time advertising on social media with very few results, because you actually need to know what you're doing there. No kidding. It's not easy. You can't just throw out ads. And now what I do is every day, I get up rather early, do my normal routine of posting and stuff, and then work on some customers, and then take a break for about an hour and get on the exercise bike and just watch a movie or something. And then later in the day, I take a break and work on my hobbies, which is building model kits and things. And that has had a dramatic effect on my mood and my life, because I'm not putting in 18 hours a day working, and I got rid of all of the cruising on social media. I don't care what's on social media. I'm just using it for business. And that's a lot less labor intensive than sitting there and scrolling through and reading all the stories and writing my opinions and getting trolled and all that kind of stuff. You know what happens. And so I can, while I haven't read your book, I can speak from experience that social media has its value, but it's not what most people are using it for. It's not, you shouldn't be using it as a babysitter, because if you are, you're not being a good parent, in my opinion. You should be watching your own child and so forth. I mean, I'm sure there's times when throwing them on a video, on a phone with a movie is a good thing, you would think, but having them sit there on Facebook, I'm not sure that's a good thing for a kid. I'm really glad it wasn't around when I was a teenager, because I would have turned out very different. And I'm glad cell phones weren't around when I was a teenager, because it would have turned out very different. So we had to, it's just fascinating how much people are dependent on those little small boxes with screens on them, and they use them for so many things that they don't need to. And I think the pandemic made it worse, and it's still getting worse.
Yeah, and the thing is, so just the other day, I heard, I didn't see, I'm not on TikTok, but there was a parent that was, really concerned and really anxious and frustrated that, they couldn't get their 20-year-old to, up and out in kind of, they weren't having the opportunities that we might have had. And that's actually what I solve. I have, as I have said, I went into different large global companies, and I've actually learned through the 35 years and sharpened these skill sets and tools and approaches that actually can be applied in a family situation like that. In fact, I have a 35-year-old daughter, and I actually did apply this since she was really little. The first step that I did was, she had a lot of emotion, but she could never articulate or say the words to the emotion. And this is a simple exercise, and I'm sure you've probably seen some of this similar exercise out there. But what I would do every morning is I would, I had all the different emotions on a board, and then I had a magnet, and then I would just have she was around 3 at the time, and I would say, "How are you feeling today?" And then we would go through the words, because at 3 she was still learning how to read. And I said, "Now select how you're feeling." And I would explain the different words to her as well. And she did this. Eventually she got to, at the moment, right? How are you feeling at this moment? Because during the day you're going to have different moods. She was able then to associate those words with the emotion. And even today at 35, there are a lot of words that mean something similar but not exactly the same, or the words sound like something that would be an emotion, and there are times when we'll even bring up emotion again and talk about the 2 different types of words. And I think and that's just one little nugget of things that is part of this whole framework that I actually work with families, moms, dads, and kids, even millenniums, right? The millennium age, really that area, to help that group articulate, because I think there's times where we're in this and we're not even articulating a lot of how we're feeling, or even just talking, right? And so that prompts, that has been really a good thing for even my relationship with my daughter, because she can, she can regulate and then actually articulate those words, where I think she probably would have missed that if we would have never gone through that one exercise. There's so many different types of things that we've done to make her successful. She's actually very empowered now. She's working for a national organization and she's a director, and she's on her way to, she's very much on her own. And I get what people are dealing with in their 20s, because I went through it with my daughter as well, but I applied all of these different approaches to that. So, it can be stressful. These are stressful times. People can be anxious, and that's what I do. Is I'm a mental health expert for busy professionals, students in schools, and families.
I understand. Yes, as a solopreneur, you can imagine I go through times of anxiety and stress and feelings that it's out of control and blah blah blah. But it's nothing like it was when I was working for a corporation, because the person that I have to satisfy is my clients and me. I don't have to satisfy anybody. Well, and the tax man and the usual stuff, but I don't have to satisfy any boss other than my clients. You could consider them bosses, I guess. And it's become much more fulfilling because I'm working for me, and any money I make goes to me and whatever I decide to donate to. And I get to make my own choices. When am I going to work? When am I not going to work? Who am I going to work with? I've decided I don't work with toxic customers. That was a big change. I mean, I turned down a $200,000 client a couple of years ago just because it's like, oh my God, I left corporate for this. Something that I see a lot of lately is people wandering around the supermarkets having conversations with Lord knows who that they're sharing with the world. They're in the middle of a bitter divorce and just talking about it while they're in the supermarket on the phone. It's like, this is really not appropriate, because first of all, we don't care. We're being exposed to your personal drama, and it's very rude to do that, like to the checker and to all the people who are in the market. And I don't even know where they get the idea that that's okay.
Yeah, and that's exactly the reason why I'm doing this, because what I've seen, and I actually predicted this would happen, is, imagine having that device in the driver's seat of the bus, and we're sitting in the back seat, and that's kind of what I'm hearing you say. It's really we are all in your situation that you were just talking about, is that we're, just having to sit back here because, that device is driving that conversation, right? But what the pause does is it gives you the opportunity to be empowered, to say, I'm going to pause, and then you're in the driver's seat, and then you choose. That's your choice. That's what makes you empowered. And then you can choose to shut down those apps. You can choose not to answer the phone. You can choose when to talk on the phone. And even like I just took 7 days pause, an entire unplug for 7 days. I do this periodically. And I know that's extreme, but it sure certainly gives me time. And, I'm out there I'm an athlete. I like to ride bikes and do all those things, right? And be in nature. And it gives me time to just really, be in God's country, right? In nature, and really give me time to imagine or even reflect on everything that's going on, because you can be in the weeds, like you were saying when you were working for corporate, which I did for 35 years, right? But I also use these different approaches, compressing time, to give me time back to do a lot of cool things, like you've seen all the published books that I have. I've produced documentaries. I've created animated shorts. I've been commissioned a play that went around the Midwest, right, for anti-bullying. Just a lot of really wild stuff. And I've done an Ironman, right? And people say, how can you do that? Right? Well, it's because I am proactive, right? I'm empowered to make my choices. When I worked for corporate, and I was a consultant, I had my own business, but I'd go into the companies, and of course you're still working for them, even though you're your own boss, but you aren't. But I would set time, and I'd say, I'm done. I'm working these many hours, and I'm shutting it off, and then I'm going to focus. And that's the whole thing about the compressed time that I actually teach people as part of some of my programs. And you have that time to choose whether to be with your family, or focus on getting that book published, or whatever, get
Right.
that run in for training or whatever you're going to do.
Yeah. When I was at corporate, I worked for Trader Joe's. I was on call 24/7 for 20 years. Literally plugged in, literally told you answer the phone within 5 minutes, or we'll be talking to you in not a nice way. So I remember I wanted to go to the Grand Canyon, and I was told, well, you're going to keep your phone plugged in and your laptop with you. And that was very disconcerting. And that's probably when I got the first idea, like, this isn't the right place for me. And there were times, a lot of times, where I'd go hiking and things, and the idea was I couldn't receive cell phone service in the middle of Joshua Tree National Park. And too bad. I have backup people. I always did. So they could handle a disaster. So it was very disconcerting, and I had to come up with ways to handle it. Now, I keep my phone in the front room and I sleep in the back room. I don't answer the phone at night. There's never been an emergency since I've left corporate that required me to jump on the phone right away. Um, if there's anybody in my life, friends and family and stuff, they're not children. They're expected to be adults. They're expected to call the right people. I'm not their emergency contact. For I'm not their 911 ambulance service. I'm not their chauffeur and stuff like that. That may sound cruel or something, but they're expected to be adults. And
Well, and that's, that's a very good example of being empowered. You are empowered to make your own decisions. You make your decisions. You actually articulate or explain that to the different people, and you're actually getting an agreement. That's the other piece of this puzzle. I have 3 different pieces: pausing, time box, which is time compression that I just talked about, and then this agreement. And this is kind of something that is very interesting. And I'm going to kind of sound like I'm doing double talk, but it's really, this is very, very important to listen. So when we make an agreement, like say that in the morning you say, I'm gonna go on a walk every day at 8:00. And we make an agreement to do that, but then we don't do it. We never really agreed to do it. So the agreement is so important that we actually aren't agreeing with ourselves half the time. And then, this was actually a skill that I used in corporate, right? And I've used it in my life. And you and I are talking, you and I agreed to have this time to do this interview and everything. And there was some back and forth to make sure we understood what the agreement was and all of that. But we came to the agreement, and I showed up because I agreed I was going to do it. And you showed up because you agreed that you were going to interview me. Right.
Mhm.
And many times there are people that will not show up because they walked away agreeing, but not really agreeing. Right.
Mhm.
And so that is such a key thing. And it's about that. If you ever watch Leave It to Beaver back in the 1970s, there was a lot of articulation and verbalization about, lessons. And I think we miss a lot of that conversation because we're relying on this to teach us instead of June Cleaver sitting down with Beaver, right, and saying, hey, do you remember today? What happened today? And then he explained it, and then she would give her little lesson, right? That's very, very, very important. And that has a lot to do with agreement, because Beaver was then agreeing. He understood because he could associate what he's experienced in that morning. And
Mhm.
she could explain as in a kind way, right? So and they were talking, right? That talking between each other in person.
Yeah, I read a book many years ago by Larry Wingett. He's a public speaker who speaks about mental health issues and things. And he wrote a book, many books, but he wrote one book called "People Are Idiots and I Can Prove It." And it's a very interesting book. The title is purposely inflammatory to get people to look at it. And one of the things he says, if you make an agreement, you keep it. So to write into what you're saying, so if you're a parent and you tell the child, I'm going to punish you if you do this, you darn well better punish that child if they do that, because
Mhm.
otherwise you're teaching them that you don't keep your word, and
Right.
they'll just get worse and worse and worse. Um, I
Yeah,
mean,
and that has a lot to do with integrity, and that's really what it's about, right? It's about and so when you say something and then follow through with it, the doing, right? Say as I do. Remember that saying, say as I do, not as I, or whatever. The say as I do and not as I do, or
Do it.
whatever that is.
Do as I say and not what I do. Do as I do and not what I
Which is
say.
an out of integrity, right? That you say what you're going to do and you do it. But the thing is, sometimes things in life come up where you need to re-say what you're going to do because you might have to make a new agreement. And that's the whole crux of this all. We can't mandate that if you're not going to follow through, then you're out of integrity. It's when you're out of integrity because you never explained to them that something changed and now this is my new agreement with you, right?
Mhm.
And what is discipline, right? And the agreement around discipline, which is not being talked about. So then when I hear the word discipline, my definition of discipline is different than yours possibly, or someone else's. And the agreement is different now, and I walk away with a different agreement than you. Again, agreement is it's all about talking about what discipline means then. You'll get
Right.
disciplined, and what does that mean? You'll be sitting in the corner at the wall for 5 minutes, or like whatever that discipline is going to be, right? It's very clear to that child or that person, right?
When I was growing up, discipline meant getting hit with a belt, getting spanked, and getting hit with a pipe.
Ooh,
I mean, it was severe.
ooh,
Yeah, and it
glad
got
that
pretty
that's
bad.
not there anymore.
They're
Whoa,
both long passed away, and I moved out a long time ago and didn't put
yeah,
up with it anymore. In
yeah.
my mind, discipline means take more like we're going to have a discussion about this, and you're going to come up with an amends for what you did. So if I had kids now, I would say, okay, you did that. You weren't supposed to do that. You stayed out late and you weren't supposed to. How are you going to make up that damage? Because you damaged our relationship. You need to fix it.
Mhm,
And that would be more discipline. Then they decide, and I agree to it, what
mhm,
that punishment is. It might be, okay, I'm going to stay home and do this. There has to be something. And
mhm,
I would agree to it, and they would agree to it, and then they have to do it. That's the way I would do discipline these days,
mhm.
as opposed to the lead pipe and the 2x4. It was never
Yeah,
2x4. It was a one. It
and
was a 1x1.
here's an example of there's some problems that I've heard, and I'm going to share, and then the reason why it's happening because of the agreements are different. Okay, so a parent or even a child, a teenage child or a millennium in their 20s, talked to the parent and said, "I wanted you to do this for me," or vice versa, right? And then the person that was receiving that didn't hit the deadline that was expected. I'm hearing a lot of that, their deadlines. The kids didn't do what they said they were going to do at the time that they said they were going to do it. And the reason why that's happening is, again, it's about the conversation about what it is. They didn't go, it's almost like a root cause analysis, right? They didn't go
Hmm.
far enough into the conversation to understand what it is that they were each agreeing to and going to do by when, or even they didn't say what the deadline was, but the one person assumed the deadline was this, right? And then, it's all that stuff.
Well,
And
another
then,
thing is the
yeah,
importance of it. Is how
yep,
important is this task? The child might think it's not important at all. The parent might think it's critically important that we have the dishes on the table for company.
right,
The child's like, I don't care.
right.
I'll say I'm going to do that and then not do it. So if the child
And
doesn't think it's
that's
important,
And that begs the continued conversation again about root cause, if you want to kind of go on that level of the depth of the conversation, because if the child or the millennium that's living at home doesn't care, it begs let's sit down and talk about this a little more and understand why is it that it isn't important to you, and why it's important to me, right? So that people can understand each other, because that's what's missing is it's a misunderstanding between the two people, right?
mhm, right? And then that just builds up until they're a teenager and nobody's talking to anybody,
Right. Yep.
and it's hard to recover from that.
Yeah. Well, and comes to they're just not motivated problem, which, you hear a lot of. Like, I had an interview for a pause challenge in July. I did a little 5-day pause challenge to encourage everyone to take 15 minutes. And there were about 42 people, experts, that came in, and many people shared what they're dealing with their kids, and a lot of them are 16 age or above, which are the millennium age, right? Gen Ys, I think that's what we call that. Um, And I heard a lot of the same thing. They're not motivated. And I think it's not about they're not motivated. We're perceiving them that way. It's about the conversation again, about the agreement, because the person, maybe the 20-year-old, whoever that is, that's being perceived as not motivated. It's probably because no one's talking to each other to understand, maybe they feel they're motivated. Maybe they're doing things that the parent doesn't know that they're doing, or the teacher, whoever is saying that they're not motivated, right? So it's all about a conversation. Let's sit down and talk about this. That's the biggest thing. And it's not just one talking about, it's a continued, you're building your relationship, you're building your rapport, you're building your wisdom, right? Together, right? In person.
My parents used to gaslight me, which is a term I only recently discovered the meaning of, where I think it's called gaslighting, where my problems weren't problems. So I would say I have this problem going on in school, and I was getting beat up, but it wasn't it wasn't anywhere near their problems. So you don't have real problems. You don't even know what real problems are. We've got real problems, blah, 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 blah. And it made me just not talk to them at all. And that happened all the time. And it really pushed us apart until when I was a teenager, my dad just wanted me out.
That's interesting. That that's a new term. I in the last 5 years or so, I started seeing that come up. But that is something, the behavior has happened for many years. I've seen it and heard it about it from, friends or colleagues or throughout the years too. And that is another problem. And that is about the busy professional or the pressure that the parents are under, right? And they're exhausted. Like I remember when I was working, I'd work 10-hour days. I'd fly out to a company, right? And I'd be out there for days and back. And I was so exhausted because each day I'd work 12-hour days because that's how it worked, right? And then I'd have Fridays off to recover, but really I was so exhausted, right? Because I worked all those hours and I flew back and forth, and it usually was a lot of miles flying. And I remember how I felt as a very busy professional, and how sometimes I would get short, and then I'd realize I was doing that, right? And I had to really be aware. Like I always talk to my daughter. I say, pretend that you have your eyes out here looking at yourself. I do that a lot for myself, because I have to, it's almost like I'm trying to catch myself in integrity. Again, the integrity is so important to me. I'm trying to always balance that and try to bring myself back into integrity, because there's many times I know I'm not in integrity, right? So it's not kind to do that. That's out of integrity to be like that to your child. Like it's just not fair. It's not, it hurts, the receiver, right? Whoever that may be, either the parent or the child, because the children can do the same thing to the parents, back and forth.
Well, of course. And then they were they fed each other.
Yeah.
So, it started probably something small in life, and they had big problems and they wouldn't talk to their kids. And me and my sister just became burdens really to them, got in the way. And it was an interesting childhood. I'm not going to get into it any more than that. This isn't a therapy session, but but I noticed the same thing at work is the bosses sometimes do the same things, where they have importances and they don't understand that so do the employees. And on the surface, it seems to be changing these days, but I don't think it is, because like I've seen companies demand everybody come back into the office, period, no exceptions. You have to work in the office. It's like, really? This day and age, you're forcing everybody back to the office? Yeah, I know you got all this real estate that you got to pay for, and I know you don't know how. I think the problem is managers don't know how to manage people who are remote. They just don't. And it's a different type of management. You can't manage by wandering around. You can't manage by looking over people's shoulders. You can't micromanage as easily. And it makes the workplace, if you demand everybody come in, work inside, when 30% of them want to work from home, you've just alienated 30% of your workforce. And the company I'm thinking of, 30% quit in one day. Just quit.
So, and you and I know, I mean, I've experienced being in the environment, having to go in every day. And I actually probably was the maverick from working remote starting in 2000. as a remote employee, and I'd always have to convince them. I'd always have to go into where I was consulting for a couple months so they could trust my work ethic and my habits and get my relationships built. And then they would say yes, and then I'd be working from home. But what I would structure, there is a structure to it that can work. And that's, again, the stuff that I know has been very successful, because many times I would be called in after 4 different people or even groups would come in to try to do what I did, and they failed, right? And it had a lot to do with the bottom line. These companies needed someone to fix it. And I would come in and fix it within 6 months or 2 years or whatever the timing would be. And they would ask me, how are you doing this? Or I don't know how you're doing this, right? But it really is this framework that I share. And that's, something that can be done remote. Like, you can design, you can alter it. There's always an alteration based on, understanding how the family unit works, or the culture works, or the environment, or the community, whatever groups you're working with. And you can adjust it and make it work. Remote does work, and I've proven that it's been very successful, but the biggest thing that's made it successful is the communication and agreement and knowing how to do that. And you and I know that.
And
right?
You have to change to a product-oriented management style where you need to deliver these things in this time frame rather than focusing on hours or being there and stuff.
Right.
I worked at a place, I won't name the name, that for a long time, and my wife was very, very ill. She was ill to the point where I was doing IVs every day with MRSA and things. And then she passed away. But during that time, it was very difficult because my boss required me to be at work. And I was like, look, if I'm not home, she could die. And I'll never forget this day. He said, I don't care. You need to be here at work. And, what do you, as an employee, that's sort of motivating, right?
Yeah.
And I remember that day very well. And he became, I guess he lost my respect at that point. And I don't know if it's just because he didn't care or if he didn't believe me or what. But that's, people have concerns at home, and that needs to be taken into account. And I think the younger generations aren't tolerating it as much anymore as I'm a baby boomer. I'm on the young side of the baby boomer. We used to tolerate it all the time because our mission in life was to have that job, the American dream. Get a good job, stay in it the rest of your life. That was the American dream. Buy the house, blah, blah, blah. Never bought a house. I don't think the young people are putting up with it anymore as much. They're not I was terrified of leaving the corporate world until I finally left. And then I realized, oh, this is better. I'm actually making more money than I did when I was a corporate, like by far, and as a writer. And that's not something I ever would have predicted. I mean, how could a writer make that much money? But you're right about the pause. I'm going to bring the conversation back to that. Me taking a break in the middle of the day to take a nap, to get on the exercise bike, to work on my model kits, whatever I want to do, it's different than I'm doing during the day, and it actually makes me more productive for the rest of the day. So even though I'm taking an hour out, it actually gives me an hour back. It's interesting to think of it that way.
It's very true, isn't it? And it's great to hear that, because there's different approaches, right? I had someone that was practicing the pause during the challenge, and what she did was she'd set the alarm at the top of the hour, and instead of doing a whole 15 minutes, she would just get up and walk around for 15 or for 5 minutes outside or something and come back to work. So then it accrued to 15 minutes or even more, because she did it almost every hour on the hour during her workday. And like you said, you actually gain, there's this mindfulness that you gain, as well as you gain your time back. It's crazy. But because you are taking that time away to reflect, you actually get creative. You let things come in. And I think without taking the pause, there's only when you take a shower or something like that is when you actually have time. And that's very little time. It's not enough time to really, just give yourself time to be, which is so important.
Yeah. Something that I practice is called the Pomodoro technique, if you've heard of that.
Yeah.
You work for 25 minutes and then you take a 5-minute break. And then every once in a while you take a 15 to 30-minute break. For writing, that works very well. What I do is I have like 5 books going at once, and I switch them. So I work like a one book in the morning, one book in the afternoon, and I switch books. And when I switch books, I do a break, because creativity is not something you can force. It's
Right.
something you have to nurture. And sometimes I just have to get up and take a break, even though it seems like I got to get this done by the deadline. I got two this week. But without taking the break, the writing quality suffers, and then the client sees that, and they know the writing quality suffered, and I don't want that. I want them to finish out their contract and maybe do another one or refer me or whatever. I want to have a good ending to that relationship. So I have to take the breaks, even though it seems counterintuitive sometimes, because I grew up in corporate, and corporate, at least when I was there, you don't take breaks. They didn't want you to take breaks. You've been in the bathroom for 5 minutes. What's going on here? that literally got that bad sometimes. And it's like, boss, this isn't none of your business. You're timing me here. You've been outside talking on the phone for 10 minutes. What's going on? It's none of your business, boss. Am I getting my job done? Well, yes, but you're not getting the hours in. I have a boss who doesn't understand.
Yeah. And the thing is too, when I took that 7 days afterwards, I, dove right back in, and I had a lot of emails, but people had asked me, well, what if someone urgently needed you? Well, it all worked out, and the emails, I went through them, and pretty much the important ones I kind of put to the top, and the rest of them we'll get to them when we get to them, or the messages will get on my pause, right, for the 7 days. I also communicated to certain people that were critical, right, in part of what my business and what I'm doing, so that they knew I was pausing, so that, they just would prepare whatever they needed to prepare until I came back. And then we just met up and got caught up. So, it can be done. There's a way to do it. I think we create almost anxiety just because we want to pause, but just let it go. Choose to pause, right? And just be in the moment and experience it was just a great experience. I biked ride from the south tip of Michigan all the way up to Mackinac City, and I camped in between, and it was with my husband, and we got to reconnect, be with each other the whole week, and it was wonderful, right? There was no plugging in at all during the whole time.
Yep. When my wife passed away, I just told everybody, I'm going to be out of pocket for the next month. And you guys, you've worked for me for 10, 15 years, and you have to handle it. And if you can't handle it, you need to find new jobs. So I took off, and I did a trip through the desert that lasted about 2 weeks. And I think I drove almost 10,000 miles in 2 weeks, and visited national parks and things, picked up my camera and started photographing stuff. And I came back, and guess what? The company survived. There were a couple of disasters or problems, and they dealt with it. And I didn't answer the phone once. It did ring. And I did check my voicemails and found out it wasn't important enough for me to break that vacation. And besides, my wife had just passed away. So, if you guys think you're more important than that, you got a problem.
Right.
And I learned a lot from that. It changed my attitude. Unfortunately, not enough, because I probably should have gone off my own business then, but I stayed there 15 more years. The way it is, I guess. So we're coming up on the end of this.
Yeah, so I just wanted to mention, the pause can be done by anyone. If you're interested in participating in pause and you want some support, you can reach out to me. It's a 90-day challenge where you take 15 minutes a day and you just pause, unplug, and breathe, and do, you can just sit and be, you can do meditation, you can do some art, you can take a walk. Do something that's going to satisfy you without any electronics, even televisions, any kind of electronics. I'm not just talking about a smartphone. Just unplug, walk away, and just really experience it. But you can reach out to me. I'm sure Rich will have my links nearby, and you can always search for me as well. I'm available to do keynotes and come in to help you, to support you. I have several packages that can support you in putting in this with your family or even your bigger groups.
Well, thank you very much for being here. I am Richard Lowe, the Writing King. As I said, I'm a ghostwriter and a writing coach. I do LinkedIn profiles. You can reach me from my website. This particular episode will be on my website, and it'll be on YouTube. And once I figure it out, it'll show up on SoundCloud and all the other audio podcasts. I've been doing video podcasts for a long time, but audio podcasts are relatively new to me. I always liked video better. This is I'm actually doing 3 Author Talks interviews per week. So you keep subscribed to these and keep getting them, and you'll enjoy hearing about the experiences of other authors. Especially if you're an author, it can be very encouraging to hear that other authors have had success and give you tips on how you can do it too. You have a great day, and thank you for appearing.
All right. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.